Hey, thanks for joining me for this video, and I'd like to introduce you to the virtual collection class. Now, here's an example that we'll work with. The way that a virtual collection works is that oftentimes in Silverlight you have elements on the page, maybe there's a grid or some other type of list item that you're binding to, and the data is coming across the wire. But you might be dealing with large amounts of data, and you need your grid to be able to reflect the full amount of data that's back on the server, but you obviously do not want to have to ship all of that data across the wire. So in this instance, I have a grid here that's bound up to the products table in the Northwind database. Now, we know that the products table has 77 records in it. In this case, I'm only pulling out the first 10, but as far as the virtual collection is concerned, it has room for about 70 spaces for the data that comes in. So this really gives you an opportunity to fine-tune the performance of your applications while having the ability to represent the amount of data that's back on the server. So if I click on this button, I can get the next 10 products, and it goes out and fetches the next 10 products, and now we have 20 products, and I can keep doing that until we fill up all the spaces within the collection. That did load in there, it was just scrolled down too far. So that's the basic demo. What I'd like to do is go into Visual Studio and show you how it's all put together. Alright, well, what I'll do is start off by reviewing some of the pieces that are put together in this application. So the page here is just a standard XAML page, and inside this layout grid I have the XAM web grid. And then down here we just have the button that will allow us to do the click in order to request new information. So let's switch over to the code behind now and start adding in some of the code that will make this page work right. So here's the code behind for the page, and everything's been basically abstracted away to work with inside a view model. So we'll just go through how we're interacting with the view model in the page, and then I'll get into the implementation in a moment. So I'm creating a member variable instance of the view model class, and when the page is loaded, then we'll subscribe to an event called data loaded off of the view model. Now what will happen is as we go to fetch the data, it obviously is making a remote call back to the server to request the data. Once it comes back, then the data loaded event will fire and the page can then respond to that. When the data loaded event is handled, then we'll set the item source on the grid to the view model's products list. And when the user clicks on the button to get the next page of data, on the view model, we're just calling fetch next page. And finally, when everything's loaded up for the first time, we're calling a method called fetch data. So let's take a look at this view model and see what's happening inside of it. So here's the view model class, and the first thing you'll see here is we're declaring a variable of the type of Northwind client. And where that's coming from, this is using a WCF service over here in my web project. You can see down here in the services folder, I have the Northwind service. If I open this up, you can see what's happening. So inside the service, we have this method here, get products for paging, and this is just a very simple method here that is taking a look at the Northwind data context and basically doing standard paging operations. I'm finding the skip count based off of the page size and the page index, and then pulling it out using some link to SQL. So some pretty basic stuff. Basically, I'll pass in the page size and what index I'm on, and I'll get back a list of products. So back over to the view model itself. I've got some other member variables here that I'm going to skip over for a moment because I'll talk about them when we see them in context. So the whole purpose of the virtual collection class is to have a collection that has some data in it, but it also represents the entire result set. So when I create a new instance of virtual collection, I pass in the type that I'm making the collection of. And then you'll notice here that we've got some constructor arguments that we can pass in. And so we have the anticipated size and the load size. So I anticipate that the size of this collection will be about 70 items. I know that the Northwind products table has 77 records in it, so I'm putting 70 in here based off of my implementation. Now I'm pulling in pages that are 10 items at a time, so that's what I'm putting in here for the load size. So what will happen is as we use our client that talks to the data service, when we get data back from it, we will then load that data into the virtual collection. And so as I showed you before, there was a method called get products for paging. So I'm subscribing to the get products for paging completed event, and so that is down here. So once it contacts the server, has the data returned from it, then I'm simply referencing the virtual collection and calling the load items method on it. Then from there, I'm keeping track of my current load index. So the first time it will be 0, And then down here at the bottom, you can see that I'm incrementing it based off of how many records are coming back. So I tell it what index to insert the items in the collection, and then I'll also pass in the result set that comes back from the event args. And so here you can see that I'm raising the data loaded event. And so that's what tells the page itself that the data has been loaded and it can respond to it. So the last methods that are relevant here are the fetch data and the fetch next page. And so when we're doing fetch data, all we're simply doing is going to our client and calling the method here of get products for paging. Obviously in Silverlight you do it the asynchronous way. So I tell it what page size I want and what the current page index is. And again, that is managed down here at the bottom. And when we're fetching the next page, all we simply have to do is increment the current page index and then call fetch data again. So basically the virtual collection is a collection class that acts as a container. You can continue to fill it with more data as it comes in, but it's able to keep information about itself so it represents the larger data set. So with all this in place, let's run it one more time and see what we've got. So here's the grid on the initial load. And if you remember what's happening is that when the page is loaded, it calls fetch data. We'll just run through this here a moment again. So when fetch data runs, we're calling the client to request the products. When we get the products, then we load it into the virtual collection, and then the page is updated. So then if we get next 10 products, we update the page index and request the data one more time. So the virtual collection is really useful when you have scenarios where you're doing paging or maybe virtual sorting or any type of scenario where you're working with a very large data set, but you only want to serve chunks of it to the user at a time.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.